Good evening and welcome to Ace Podcast Nation. Tonight, Matt on mental health is back, and tonight I'm joined by Mr. Gareth Williams, current Penallta Youth head coach, to share his story. It is Blood Cancer Awareness Month, so it was an opportunity for Gareth to come on and share his journey, really. So good evening, Gareth. How are we doing, buddy?
Evening, Matt. You would say you're lucky to have me at this time of night, as you know very well.
I'm normally bed by now, anyway, in fairness.
Ready for my early morning. So, good evening, everybody, and glad to be here.
Awesome. So, obviously, I know you're doing a lot at the moment in raising awareness, and obviously we'll get onto that as we go through the show. But I did want to mention right at the very beginning, because obviously we are talking about mental health. Obviously, the devastating news about Ricky Hatton this week. I don't think I've seen anything officially, publicised or anything that he did take his own life. But I know he had his struggles. It was well documented that he had his struggles, and just an awful, sad thing to see. He was a great warrior, a great champion, a great boxer. To leave a young family behind like you have is just so sad, but isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is, and the thing is, you hear more and more stories. I don't know whether it's just because people are getting more prepared to talk, or whether the world and society is just getting more of a struggle. But I think you just hear more and more of this stuff, and ironically today, and again, I'm not that great with social media, but I'd seen something that Jason Tovey had put on his socials, and he's filming himself train, and it was one of the things basically him saying that he's been going through a tough time, started to sort of dislike the situation he was in, so motivating himself and hopefully motivating others, and getting, so things are getting more public with it, I guess. But and I guess blokes of our sort of age are getting a little bit more aware of, I suppose, the benefits of talking about things. So as I said, it is a shame when perhaps individuals haven't necessarily been able to take that step, or they've felt that the support wasn't there or whatever, and it's a shame that if that's what did happen with Ricky, that the intervention measures weren't in place. But it is really sad.
Yeah. So thoughts with Ricky and his family and friends. Right, so tonight is all about you, my friend. Like I said earlier, use the platform to spread as much awareness as possible. Obviously, I've got to know you quite well over the last probably 2 to 3 years. So I thought it was an ideal opportunity for you to come on and share your story with some of the guys who tune in. So looking forward to it. No tears, mind, right? Because I don't like crying, but I'm sure we'll be fine. I've got a video to play after as well. And perhaps we'll give that 5 or 10 minutes, get some stragglers to wait for some stragglers to come in, and obviously
fine. And with the video, the thinking was with that really is, and again, it'll raise some talking points, because when I look back at some of the photographs that I shared, I'll talk around those, and it'll hopefully relate to some of the audience, and maybe people in a similar situation. But I realised how good I was at hiding certain things, and as you say, it is Blood Cancer Awareness Month, so we'll get into why perhaps I've felt the need to now to sort of get involved with this stuff. But I think, as well as that, yes, I've got my challenges with physical health, but I think obviously the strain and sort of the ongoing battle, I guess, with the sort of the chronic illness, with the type of leukemia I've got, chronic myeloid leukemia, has obviously played a part in my own mental struggles as well over the last couple of years. So I think it's sort of, when I had the invite to come on, it seemed like a good opportunity, as I said, to raise awareness for the charity and for the cause itself. But equally, I think talk about my own struggles and I suppose what I've done to try and sort of keep myself on track, I suppose, and hopefully, by raising this awareness, it wasn't necessarily just for fundraising. I was thinking about perhaps what I needed at my lowest, and it wasn't necessarily that available. And if I can do some bits and bobs and And it's not necessarily people with leukemia, it might be any sort of challenge, but if it helps to sort of inspire, motivate people to use movement as medicine, is the phrase I'm sort of using at the moment, then hopefully I can have a bit of an impact.
Yeah. Take us back then, but and I know it might be difficult to go back and reflect, but I know obviously you got diagnosed in 2021. So take us back perhaps a little bit before that, and just how did the diagnosis come about then?
Well, yeah, okay. Probably useful to tell a little bit of a story, I suppose, about me, because it helps, I guess, then understand how I suppose I had some lows, in the early days. But I come from a very sporting background, very active background. I suppose people may argue, but I was a decent enough rugby player and had a decent enough career. Finished with Caerphilly when then they were in Europe and the sort of decent standard, and maintained a decent level of active lifestyle after that. My boys were born, got into surfing, got into skiing, did all sorts of very active, and around about the time of my diagnosis, we were obviously in that shitty lockdown period where I think I travel a fair bit with work. I'm a civil engineer, so I'm involved with some big projects across the UK. I was traveling a lot, and all of a sudden we won a load of time back. I wasn't commuting in the mornings, I wasn't driving or on the train, and all of a sudden we had a load of time back, didn't we? And life was great in the early days with the lockdown, and then it sort of it got to a point then where all of a sudden, I think, whether it was just us did it to ourselves or organisations, but that commute time almost then got replaced with Teams meetings and all sorts. And I think I was on Teams, all bloody day, and I think so certain things I guess I didn't necessarily recognise at the time, but a friend of mine, one of the guys who's supporting me now with my my endurance training, I guess, he's an old rugby school friend, lives up in Milton Keynes, but we're all buddies from Pontypool. We just said, right, we'll hold each other to account. We were doing the Joe Wickses, like lots of people were at the time, getting up WhatsApping each other in the morning and doing a bit of exercise before logging on to our respective jobs. And all was great. Was doing it. Then when we started being allowed out, I was doing a fair bit of running, and then I suppose I got an injury which I struggled to recover from, my calf. Still managing to do the Joe Wickses, but then one day I just assumed I'd pulled something in my stomach. It was tender, and but again, being an old rugby player, a typical bloke, I didn't think too much of it. It didn't really stop me from doing anything, so I carried on. But when I was trying to have a bit of a run, I was just really struggling to sort of breathe, and I, again, didn't think much of it. I just thought it was, lost all my fitness because I hadn't trained for a little while due to the injury. Was just talking myself into the fact, well, I'm a big guy, a rugby player, not a runner, and perhaps it's just a motivation thing, and just didn't feel like it. But this pain in my side, in my stomach, was still hanging around. And my wife, she teaches beauty therapy, massage therapy. She was having a bit of a feel about to see whether it was, constipation, as funny as that might sound, but she wondered if I'd popped a rib or done something. So again, I poo-pooed it like you do, and then had a telling off from my mum one night, and it was like, go and get it checked out. So I went, and they said, well, you look all right, but we'll get you some blood tests on a Friday morning. I was booked in to see if I had any infection or something. So got up Friday morning, and this was March time, so it was Six Nations time, I remember it. Went for the blood test, done my Joe Wick session in the morning on Teams during the work day, and then I remember I was watching an Eddie Butler sort of documentary rerun of an old Grand Slam season about 9 o'clock in the night, and all of a sudden, big bang on the door. Looked outside and blue lights were flashing, and it was like a scene from E.T. I don't know if you remember, and people on the the stream might remember the film where we take over Elliot's house and this guy walked up the door in a full hazmat suit. Mr. Williams, yeah, right, need to come in, need to get you straight to hospital. Is your wife here? Need to sit you both down. Okay, what's going on? Well, I'll sit down and I'll tell you, we think you've got cancer. We need to get you in now. We know that you've been for blood tests today and your bloods are telling us that, you know, you're ready to drop. So it was quite a traumatic evening, if I'm honest. And then obviously because of the lockdown situation, my wife had to drive me to the Gwent. She couldn't come in, so I had to walk myself in and check myself onto the ward.
You know, to be told that in your like living room, and then, you know, for your wife to have to drive you down, I bet, you know, like, well, you can't even imagine kind of what kind of thoughts were going through.
Oh, it was bonkers. It was bonkers, yeah. You know, and I think the weird thing was, obviously, because of the data that they were seeing, I think my white blood cells were absolutely through the roof. I had very few red blood cells. So, you know, I think the concern was that I was ready for a stroke or something. But I think because I was fairly, I suppose, content in the house that night, you know, they said, well, we'll go in the morning. But of course, we just laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling all night. You know, we just didn't know what to think, didn't know what to do, didn't talk to each other. It was a strange situation.
So what was the time period then, Gareth, that you felt that initial something's not right, and that's obviously the ticking off from your mum, and you actually went?
It were I probably around about 3 weeks, I think 2 to 3 weeks, and I think because I was doing so, you know, the doctors, the consultants at the time said that this has been baking in the background for some time based on, you know, previous blood tests that I'd had. And I think because perhaps, you know, for whatever reason, it started to ramp up, whether it was then because I was trying to push it a little bit and do a little bit more, but my spleen was trying its hardest to deal with the blood. But because there was very few red cells there, it couldn't process them essentially. So it swollen around about 4 times its size. So that was the pain. It was my spleen basically putting pressure on my ribs and everything, and it was like a balloon.
So talk to me about the signs and the symptoms then. So obviously you said you had pain in your stomach. The signs and symptoms of leukemia, blood cancer then, is it the same for everyone or can it differ in individuals? You'll have to excuse my ignorance.
I think there's common symptoms. I don't know if I had all of them. I think when we look back now and we look at photographs of me and Gareth sort of looks at the signs, I think we could see things now that were sort of perhaps apparent. And as I said, you know, we put things down to the fact that I was in the house a lot. My complexion had gone a little bit, you know, because I was on Teams all the time. I thought that I was just exhausted because I was on Teams. I was talking all day, but it was something I'd never really done, you know, falling asleep on a settee. You know, I was always mindful of just sleeping, you know, during the night and at bedtime. But I'd finish work, I'd be downstairs, it'd be something on a telly, and I'd nod off, you know, in minutes. And we just put it down to the fact that I was just talked out. But I think, you know, then putting 2 and 2 together with me trying to exercise, I think the short bursts with the Joe Wicks HIIT sessions were obviously manageable. But as soon as I got up to I suppose, you know, a level of higher heart rate, my body was shutting down. So my whole body was sort of felt like a cramp, really, you know, and the breathlessness and like I said, you know, hot and sweaty in bed. I didn't have all the bruises that sometimes come with it. You know, sometimes I think if you get a tap, you're easy to bruise. So there was certain things, but what I was getting as well, you know, is when I was brushing my teeth, there was a lot of blood showing. So there were things when we look back, but I think because there was also other things that perhaps coincidental at the time wouldn't necessarily have made it really apparent. So I think if I hadn't had this issue with my spleen, I probably would have gone on and on and on, not really noticed anything.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? It's mad. Before we go on, and I wanted to show the video of, you know, perhaps your journey and some of the things you've done. And as you mentioned, some of the different photos that we've got to play. How did that initial diagnosis then? How did that affect not only yourself, but obviously you've mentioned you've got 2 young boys, obviously your wife as well. What kind of impact did it have on obviously you as a person, but not only you, your family as well? Because it must have been a massive shock to you all.
Yeah, well, I think I'm well, I suppose I'd always considered myself as fairly pragmatic, a problem solver. I think, like I said, with the job that I do, and I suppose in pressure situations a lot, I guess. I think I remember doing this, sort of rubbing my hands together and just saying, right, let's do what we need to do then, and we'll sort it out. I think Keris, my wife, on the other hand, was trying to be brave, I guess, and didn't want to show too much emotion. But I think at the time, because I was dropped off essentially, I had to go into hospital for a week for them to prove the diagnosis. So then it was a series of bone marrow biopsies where they had to put me in the fetal position essentially and drill into my pelvis and pull a sample of my bone marrow out to send it off to the lab. And they had to hit me with a fairly aggressive chemotherapy to kill all of these excessive white cells.
I'm guessing you weren't allowed visitors at that time either, was you?
Nothing at all. So, and we weren't even allowed out the rooms because obviously, with it being hematology, the water was on. It was so controlled. It was really weird. Like I said, it was like the scene off E.T. With plastic sheets everywhere, and very controlled. I like the hospital, the doctors and nurses, absolutely fantastic in the way they looked after me, and I think that they were keeping me informed, they were keeping me up to date. So I think I was in the mindset, right, let's just get on with it and do what we need to do. I think Keris was obviously at home. She was looking on the internet, looking for all sorts of information about it. And at the time, I think things have changed quite a bit over the last few years, but at the time, the only stuff available on the internet was fairly limited, and the form of leukemia I've got was suggesting, a prognosis of about 5 years. So of course she was thinking all sorts. The consultants were then saying, well, look, things have moved on. The information on the internet isn't necessarily as up to speed as the medicine and the research and all the rest of it. So it's not necessarily a death sentence with the form of drugs and chemotherapy that we can try. So the different lines of defense. So I for a good period of time I was right. Well, let's just do what we need to do. So fairly positive, and it was, I suppose then I was trying to be there then and be that rock and anchor, I suppose, then for Keris, ironically. And we tried to just keep it not necessarily away from the boys, but just sort of we wanted their lives to be as normal as possible. So it was telling them what they needed to know essentially, rather than ramming it down their throats.
Yeah, fair play, but it's probably not a position you want anybody to be in. Really, to
no,
have to have those types of conversations with your boys, but. Obviously, I know both your boys, 2 level-headed young men, and fair play to them. But from I know you're very close knit as a family. You do lots and lots of things together, and some of that will come across in this video that I play now. So the video is about a minute long, guys. So bear with us, and we'll be back very shortly. If you do want to ask Gareth any questions, by all means. He is an open book. I'll say that for him because I know him very well. But yeah, he won't shy away from anything. But well, I don't think he will anyway. But here's the video, and also we'll touch base with Gareth again after this. Fair play, buddy. One thing I will say is you do like an holiday, mind, don't you? Fair play.
we I suppose, well, that's one thing this does, isn't it? It makes you appreciate how short life can be and how things can catch you out. So we spread it out, and I think why I chose some of those photographs wasn't necessarily to sort of show off the holiday destination, but I think, you know, it was more to try and give a feel for me pre-diagnosis, as I said, you know, really active. And I guess, well, I go into it now. Really, I had that sort of strength of character, I suppose, at a point in time where, right, I got to get back to work. I've got to start doing stuff, you know, and get back into it. And I think that lasted a good while. And then all of a sudden, I started really struggling with the side effects from the treatment. You know, I tried to go surfing again. I remember on a weekend, me and Ruben had gone surfing, which felt great. And I was being seen weekly by my consultant. He asked me how I've been doing, and I said, "Oh, Brill, you know, feel great. Gone surfing down Porthcawl." And I said, "I was thinking about going tonight." He said, "No, you're not." I said, "Oh, right, okay, what's the matter?" He said, "Right," he said, "bit of a problem." He said, "Where we've tried to hit you with the chemo to deal with your white cells, it's essentially turned your marrow off. So you're not producing any cells at the moment. So that means you know, if you have a bump, you've got no hemoglobin, so you won't clot, you just won't stop bleeding. But notwithstanding that, if you're going down Porthcawl surfing, you're likely to get an infection, and that'll be the end of it." So it was right, okay. And I was back and forth to Gwent then weekly for transfusions. I was having to inject myself with different bits and bobs to try and generate the marrow, regenerate it, and start producing cells. So all of a sudden, you know, where I was starting to feel a little bit better and find my feet, you know, that was one taken away, and then I was having issues then with bone aching and the muscle aching, and or just to the point where, you know, it's going out in fresh air, trying to do a little bit, and it was just a struggle, you know, skin conditions, all sorts, and it just started then to get exhausting, you know. And then my eyes, one day went to the opticians just to get a check, and she caught something at the back of my eyes, referred me to my team, a hematology team and an ophthalmology, and they found then that obviously prior to me starting treatment, because your eyes are so oxygen hungry, and they couldn't find any red blood cells to get the oxygen, a bit like sort of tree roots looking for water. They had the blood vessels and all sorts trying to search for blood, and they were saying if they hadn't caught it at the time, they might well have buggered my eyes up, and I could have gone blind. So of course they had to do laser surgery then to try and cauterize the veins and various bits going on. So then it was like, well, you can't go skiing now if you have a bump, or if you do any of this, and that's the end of that. So it's like, well, you know, I've worked hard to get to a position where we're enjoying life. You know, we're doing the things that we want to do, that I want to do. And then all of a sudden, when you sort of, you know, thinking, well, why me now? Like, you know, and I imagine everybody in the situation is like this. Why me?
Yeah.
Why now? And then I think then my positivity that I'd had with the first sort of 6, 8, 12 months maybe started to wane. You know, and then the consultants then were talking to me about the first line of treatment being a failed treatment. So then we had to try something else, and then you're always worrying then about, right, well, okay, how am I going to be on this? And I, you know, what if this one fails? How many lines of defence have I got before, you know, you really start looking where you're scraping a barrel? So I think it then started at me, I think, more mentally. And I think, you know, when again you look at some of those photos, and I think this is with leukemia perhaps, and just generally in mental health struggles, no one would have really thought I was ill. Really, I don't think, you know, I look well enough, and And the irony is that some of those trips that the wife and I were on was probably when I was at my lowest. You know, and some of the conversations I was having with her at the time were about just, you know, hoping that or wishing that the lights went out, you know, because it was just, you know, I was just struggling with all sorts. I didn't feel that I was being a very good dad, a husband, you know. I was just struggling with confidence, self-esteem, just you know, slowly chipped away, I guess, to the point where I was just having, you know, really negative thoughts, and not necessarily where I ever expected to be, you know, and didn't know how to deal with it either, you know, because I said, I think I'm good at putting on a brave face. And I think, you know, some of those photographs, when I look back at that time, you know, as I said, knowing the conversations I was having with Gareth, but looking at some of those, I realised how good I was at hiding it, you know, and I think I isolated myself a little bit, not knowingly, but I think I must have withdrawn from my normal social groups. Everything was a bother, everything was effort, everything was a struggle. You know, I think thankfully I had the rugby, and because I was committed to the rugby, I couldn't just let people down. So I think I was chipping away, and just, you know, there was a reason for me to get out of the house, get off my ass. I think if I didn't have that, I'd have struggled more so. But, you know, some of those photos were my favourite places. You know, we go to the south of France, down to Biarritz a lot with surfing, and absolutely love the place. But I couldn't even be bothered to drive to the airport to get on the plane. You know, everything was just really, really hard work, and I didn't know what to do, where to go, and it was a real struggle, and I was hard to be around. None of us knew what to do. You know, it was difficult.
So after the diagnosis, I know you mentioned about your wife looking for support and things online. Was there any support you did have to help manage, obviously, some of the feelings that you were having?
I think we know more now than we did at the time, and whether it was just because, you know, things are more aware, or now we're aware, I don't know. But I think obviously she had a family around. I think the hospital, the team were good, but it was very, how do you call it, medical, I suppose. And you know, after a while, I think I was, you know, again, talked me into raising it with my consultant, who himself had obviously gone through a cancer treatment as well, so he, you know, he could relate. And to be fair to him, he then referred me to the clinical psychologists who deal with cancer care. You know, and that even, you know, I didn't even want to talk. I didn't want to get going, and you know, I was put off. And then they phoned me the one day, made the appointment, and it was, I suppose, like I said, I then had to do it because I felt I had to do it because it needed to be done for me to be better for the family, if that made sense. Yeah. You know, and start to function. You know, and I turn up, I go to work every day. I'd manage work. No one in work would have known that I had any of these struggles going on. You know, and
have your employer been really supportive with you through all, obviously, your journey?
Well, I think again, you know, that they were very supportive. You know, because of the nature of the particular illness. You know, it's something, and again, and weirdly, I mean, there's a lot of tension around it, because I know that in one breath I'm celebrating the fact that I'm doing half marathons, but in the next breath I'm being treated for cancer. So like, it's a weird one. So I never ever wanted sort of sympathy, but at the same time, I think people struggle to remember that it's not like a cold. Do you know what I mean? And I look well. If I've been away, there's a bit of colour on my skin. You know, people, oh, you still got it then, have you? You know, and it's nobody's fault, but it's a weird one. And you know, like I said, you've got this challenge all the time, this tension that there's always uncertainty. You know, and I might be all right now, but I don't know if I'm going to feel like this in 2 years' time. You know, and you know, then you feel guilty because you think, well, I'm not like that person that I know who's perhaps had a limb taken off to deal with cancer treatment, or you know, and then you talk yourself into the different suppose the stories that then you feel guilty about that, but it's all right for them. They've had a limb removed. They're sorted now. Their treatment's over, and you've got it hanging out. So it's always a difficult one. And then you have the conversations where so that's the good cancer you've got, mind. And it's there's lots of sort of tensions that, and I think that was when it started to really mess my head a little bit. Where like I said, I almost felt that I should be grateful. And it was a weird one, and again, you just end up sort of like tying yourself up in knots and telling yourself the wrong stories, and it, I just went to a really low spot then for a while.
How did you get out of that low spot? And tell me what type of changes and how your lifestyle changed. What did you implement into your...
This might have been coincidental, I think, but obviously starting to talk to the clinical psychologists was good, because I'd never ever done any sort of therapy before. I'd never spoken to anybody about this sort of thing, so I didn't know what it was going to be about. So I had to, I guess, trust in the process. But at the same time, again, whether it was coincidental, whether I was looking for it or not, I stumbled across people like Ryan Holiday and Donald Robinson who talk about stoicism and stoic philosophy and all this sort of stuff and the mindset. And then when I was talking to the psychologists, and they were talking about different things, so there was a lot of talking initially, which was good in the beginning. But then I realised I struggled then, because it was just talking for talking's sake, and I felt, because again, perhaps my engineering background, I don't know, we got into all sorts started to come out, and it was like a perfect storm, and to the point where again, maybe I was fixating on certain things that weren't helping. And then the professionals were saying, well, actually, it seems like you ought to go for a diagnosis for ADHD. We think you're an high functioning ADHD and it's not anything that you've ever recognized before, but all of the sort of things that we're dealing with, it's almost like all this stuff is coming together. And I was like, Jesus, is there anything else? And so it was weird, but it was like it helped to unlock a few different things, because it helped me figure out how my brain was working a little bit, and some of the things that perhaps I'd done for years, we understood a little bit more. Some of the things that I'd annoyed Gareth for over the years, she understood why a little bit. It was weird, but the stoic stuff, I then started to join the dots. And when we were talking about the tools then, because I was asking for tools rather than just talking, and we were talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and like almost trying to find the evidence for the stories I was telling myself or not, and when you get into these negative spaces, it's, well, what's the evidence to support that? Writing it down, well, actually, I have more evidence to support the positives. And when I realized actually all this stuff came from Stoicism, I know Spiller last week mentioned, Marcus Aurelius and some of these philosophers. Well, I started reading that, and when I read those, it was really relatable, really, really relatable to me, because it was not, there was no fluff around it. It was just a mindset and thinking about these things, and essentially thinking that it's not things that's actually affecting me. It's my thoughts about things that's affecting me, and then very much then started getting into the mindset of focusing what I can control, but practicing it. I never understood how to practice it. So I'm just going back and seeing these therapists who were really, really helpful. We've talked about things, we'd unpick a load of stuff, but I couldn't necessarily relate to what practicing meant. So like I could pick up a rugby ball and I could practice passing off my left and right hand and, physically touch something, but I didn't know how to practice, how to meditate, or how to sort of practice, emotional regularity or any of these things. And when she started to break it down, and I think because then we started getting, because I'm a coach, I needed to be coached, and it was coming at it from different sort of angles, if that makes sense. And I think it was like, well, when you're driving down the street and someone cuts you up at the lights or whatever, and you normally lose your shit and get all emotional about it, that is an opportunity to practice. So at that moment in time, you could either go with it, or you could recognize that your blood is starting to boil and think, well, that person may have been on their way to the hospital. They may be rushing to see their mother, and all of a sudden, and they might not have, they might have just been an idiot, but all of a sudden, right, I've caught it. I've caught myself going there, and I could cool myself down a little bit, and slowly but surely started to be a bit more mindful about some of these things. When I feel myself starting to tell these stories to myself, the negatives, oh, you're no good, you're never organised, you're never this, that, and the other, and work are going to forget about me if my health isn't this, that, and the other. And when I was catching myself, I would then write things down and start sort of mapping out the evidence, I suppose, and that essentially one of the main fundamentals of that sort of Stoic philosophy is thinking about what you can control, and when I talk about control, I mean absolute control. So and the only things you can really control are your thoughts and your actions. The things you can't control. Like, I want to make a good impression tonight, but I could have an 100% stellar performance, but I've got no control on what people think of me.
No.
Right, and that could eat me up inside, but now I'm comfortable with that concept.
Well, I'll put you at ease by you then, because someone's just put a comment in. Thanks, Gareth, for talking about what you went through. I'll put it up on the screen from Paul. Thanks for talking about what you went through, Gareth. A man with courage and strength, heart of gold, respect to you and your family, hard on everyone. Keep fighting the fight.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate that.
Another one from father and son in golf, Mr. Gareth Short, I think. Gar, the way you've opened up about your news shows incredible courage. Your honesty and strength will help so many.
And that's the aim, Matt. I think I was I started to realise that as I was getting stronger, and I had real low, like I said, I started to struggle in work. Couldn't motivate myself, and made some changes, and it was essentially, I think, then I was going into a depressed state, and then
talk to me. Obviously, I know, but talk to me about some of the changes you did adapt to then, and or go if it's an easier way. What's a good day now for Gareth? What's a bad day for Gareth?
Yeah, okay. Well, again, and as I said, me, the type of, and I think this is where now it's easier to recognise some of these ADHD traits, the way I sort of hyper-focus on certain things. So when my doctors were talking to me initially about antidepressants and all the rest of it, I couldn't handle the thought of it because of these failed treatments I'd had with my chemo. I couldn't comprehend throwing something else into the mix. I needed to understand the root cause. I needed to understand what was going on so I could deal with it. And I think, again, sort of fixated on, behavioral therapy and reading a lot of books, and books that everyone's probably read now, the Chimp Paradox, the Atomic Habits, reading a lot of books by Stoics and as I said, like Ryan Holiday and things like this. So some of the things that I do, I journal, and even if I'm not journaling necessarily, I'm sort of mapping some of these things out. So the good days now are just like I feel really normal. Like the back in, and you were a part of this, so I want to thank you for this. And Spiller actually last week, so spring, I guess, 2024, where I was bumbling along. I again lost my identity, lost a sense of purpose, and then just didn't really know what to do myself. I was overweight, starting to lose shape, starting to lose fitness, and again, because of me thinking about who I was, what I was doing, that was actually a blocker for me getting going again. So, like, a friend of mine, again, chap who I was talking about with Joe X, was at his place, and he said, right, coming up this weekend, there's a 5K event on, come and do it with me, and see how you get on. So I did, right, took my kit up, and I did this 5K in about 40 minutes, which was, I was chuffed that I managed to do it, but that was based on the last time I'd done a 5K a recorded one was about 22 minutes, a couple of years previously, up in the Penallta Park run. So it was like, I just had to get over it. And again, I couldn't control what was going on, but what I could control was what I did about it now. And my mate said to me, well, what's wrong with you now then going to do park run? You've pulled the plaster off. You're doing 40 minutes. It is what it is. But just get out there, do what you need to do, and have a bit of exercise. So I started doing that. And then obviously you and I started talking about your joining Spillers program. And I remember thinking, well, I'll do that again if I'm doing it with a bit of company as well, and getting into it, just because I knew I needed something to get me again back to the accountable side of things. And I think all of this stuff as well, it all coincided with me realizing that I'd lost a hell of a lot of myself. I'd retired from rugby. We'd had lockdown then, there's all sorts, so like really, really isolated, really quite lonely, I think. And I sort of, like I said, you're doing stuff with the family and everything else. And actually, it was only when I was in this mental state I realized that all of this stuff had perhaps grown arms and legs without me even realizing. So I think the community sense side of things, getting back into the office and forcing myself to travel with work again and be a little bit more motivated, all started to sort of come about as I was starting to feel better about myself. And not because I was looking any better, but the fact that I was chipping away. I started to, eat better again. And I got to the point where it was like, right, again, what can I control? I can't control how well the drugs deal with this leukemia. The results will sort themselves out. But what I can do is start being a bit more mindful about how I fuel myself. What I can do is starting to go and chip away, getting myself a little bit fitter. And as I said, follow Spillers program for a few cycles, friends around, sort of WhatsApping each other, tick, yeah, session done, and I would know I was doing the same with you. And it just got to the point where then that sort of consistency beats intensity, consistently good is better than occasionally great, some of these cliches that you hear, but they're so true. And I just kept chipping away. And ironically, one of the sort of, the main things that comes out of the sort of stoicism thing and is that the obstacle is the way. So actually always looking for the opportunity in adversity. So it was like, well, it is what it is. There's an opportunity now for me to almost reinvent myself to a certain extent. And I'm probably in better shape now, or I'm in as good a shape now as I was playing rugby. And so there's a few things that have happened that have kicked me up the arse to get me going. And I think, obviously the medics were a bit worried about it, a bit concerned. But then when they look at my blood results, my red cells, white cells, all spot on. The cancer's starting to see a bit of a decline. So they said, well, look, just keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and if it's working for your top 2 inches, which I see it as the most beneficial factor here, it's not necessarily about what I'm doing or about how I look. It's the fact that I know when I've done what I need to do, the non-negotiables every day, I'm a better version of me, and I'm better for the wife, I'm better for the kids, I'm better in work. And all of this has coincided with me moving more. So I think, coming back to your question, long way around, the good days are me getting up. And it's not perfect all the time, and like I said, I try and organise myself. I got a plan A, B, and C, and a plan A is getting up, getting in the gym early, knowing what I need to do, or going for a run, and it's done, spot on. Then I home, shower, food, work. If I'm not feeling it, if I haven't had a good night's sleep, I've got a plan B session and I've got a plan C. So I've taken the pressure off myself. So it's not like, oh, well, if I haven't done it, balls to it, I don't bother for the rest of the week and then fill my face with all sorts of food. I've just set myself up now so I'm always chipping away, and just keeping the streaks going, so to speak. And that helps me feel good. And I think, someone had said to me, I was doing some bits and bobs. I'd obviously done this, a year on, I suppose, following Spillers program. Then all of a sudden, I'm starting to do 22-minute park runs again, and then I'm starting to enter events. I was in Brighton in March time, I think it was, did a sub 50-minute 10K. then I did this ultra run in the summer, and then people said, well, what's next? And I think because I'm a sportsman by background, and I think, oh, there's people doing way more than me. So I just sort of poo-pooed it. I'm not doing any, yes, it feels good that I'm doing some of these things, but they weren't that significant. And then someone said, yeah, but not many people are doing it on chemo. And I thought, all right, that's the point. And he said, well, have you ever thought of documenting this? Have you ever thought of actually, if you're doing it, how many people are like you, but just waiting for that little bit of inspiration? They're all worried about what they're being told not to do, and not to go surfing, not to go swimming, not to go running and pushing themselves. But actually, that bit of that movement, that exercise, and it's all relative. They don't necessarily need to go out and do what I'm doing, but going for a walk, going and doing, some swimming in the sea, whatever it might be. I think it's just understanding that actually just flipping a switch and doing it might be that catalyst for them to actually feel better about whatever it is they're struggling with. And that might just be mental health challenges. It may be leukemia, it may be other physical ailments. But I think for me, it has been a real catalyst to big improvements in my life, and not necessarily just dealing with cancer. I think, taking it as an opportunity, I think I'm a better bloke than I was before.
Brilliant, but top man. So that leads us into nicely then, obviously, what you're doing next. So explain to the guys some of the things you've got planned over the next 12 months, maybe.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And I'm really excited about this. And again, it doesn't seem that much when I think about it, because I said, I know there's a hell of a lot of people doing a lot more than this, but I was on a run, and I a few weeks back, I say it was a few weeks, it's probably 2 months now, I'd started obviously just extending the sort of running. So I've adopted, I suppose, like a hybrid type of training, lifting heavy weights and doing a lot more endurance running. And I think it's made me feel like I'm training for rugby again, which is why I've probably adopted to that rather than just bodybuilding or just running.
I'm sure we could organise a vets game, mind.
Well, I do wonder sometimes. I do wonder, but then all of a sudden I realise how long it's been since I've taken a knock. But my mate said, well, let's start running from Caerphilly down to Cardiff Castle, which is about 20k. So I was like, bloody hell, I wasn't doing this when I was playing rugby, let alone now. And then we started doing that as our regular long run, and nice easy pace. So it was a good talk. So again, it was another opportunity to realise actually this isn't necessarily just about the running. I was spending an hour and a half with a friend talking, and we were getting all sorts of our chest and just blokes chatting away, whether it was a load of rubbish, whether it was something deeper. It was the social connections, but all of a sudden we were knocking these distances off regularly, and someone said, well, what's next? What's next for Gareth? You've done this sort of ultra thing in this summer. What's next? And as it happens, the ultra event that we did, it's their 10-year birthday next year. So they've unveiled that they're doing a 50k ultra. So I thought, well, is there a sequence of events that will start this year and almost span over a period of time that I can sign up to? And then someone said, well, if you're going to do that, why don't you do it for charity and actually use you as a platform to sort of help motivate and make raise awareness and raise some funds if you can for charity. So essentially that's what we did. A friend of mine, so there's a half marathon I'm doing in December, then and again coincidentally they're all up this part of the world, but just because of the way the dates suit. But there's a 20 miler then a couple of months later, then I'll do a full marathon in the May, and then this 50k ultra then in the July. But I'm doing it with the mindset of raising awareness for the charity Leukemia Care, and why I suppose I'm aligned to them. There's lots of charities, I suppose, raising funds for the science, behind research for the medicine with leukemia and other blood cancers. But I think Leukemia Care were very much focused on support, and the challenges that people are having. And I thought, because of perhaps my own struggles. That was why I thought, actually, no, there's a real sort of I guess sense of purpose in supporting them and their mission, because it was something I definitely could have benefited from more if I knew more about them at the time, and if there's more guys like me, who will benefit for and helping raise that awareness of them and these sort of challenges, then it made perfect sense, really. So, and I guess because of where I am now mentally, it felt like a good time. It was sort of Blood Cancer Awareness Month, Mental Health Awareness Month, mapped out all of these things. It was almost like it all just came together. So, do you know what? Let's do it. And this coming Saturday, so the cancer, I've got CML Awareness Day, I think, is on the 22nd. So what we're trying to do at the rugby club this weekend is everyone from seniors right the way through to mini and juniors doing a dummy club where everyone wears orange for CML, and/or we'll make a donation to the charity to my Just Giving page. So
Amazing.
we want to try and get everyone wearing orange essentially Saturday, and getting going for that. So yeah, that's the point. I want to promote movement as medicine as much as anything else, Matt. And that medicine could be, just generally feeling better physically, mentally, and I think, as I said, if I can help. Go on, sorry.
I was going to say, how important, obviously, I know you've played rugby for years and years, and obviously you're still involved with Penallta, obviously with the youth head coach, but how important has that rugby environment been to you over the years?
Well, it's massive, because I said, like, when I finished playing rugby, I got in, I was raising a young family, I suppose, and got a little bit isolated, I suppose, from my peers. And when I was playing with Caerphilly, there wasn't so many of us who were local lads in that squad environment. So, everyone went their own ways. We played in the Premiership for a little bit, and then I finished. But obviously I had old connections. So Penallta, for me, I'm a Pontypool boy, born and bred. But Penallta, for me, I got introduced to Penallta years ago. So I knew people like Alan Lucas and Matthew Tucker, obviously big influences in the club. So obviously when my son playing here, got involved with the club, and just almost giving some knowledge and giving some experience back was huge. But I think, just having that sense of community and having people, and I think, as I said, like getting to know you over the last few years, and having people to talk to about different things. You've got an instant family, I suppose, haven't you? You've got, there's always someone you've got something in common with. And I think that's what rugby does. And I think what I'm seeing more and more, like, the group you've added me to recently, Gareth Shaw is promoting, and absolutely fantastic. And I've realised I'm not on my own. There's lots of people who are in similar circumstances, and it can be a bit cliche. And I know there was a chap last week who said he struggled, like talking isn't necessary for him. But I think Spiller asked the question, again, it's having the right person to speak to. And I think that is something I've also, I suppose, being mindful of as well, is that I surround myself now with people who are mainly going to give me energy, and the things I tend to do will keep me up, rather than sort of, sapping energy, if that makes sense. And it's even that with the mindset I try and promote with the coaching, that we want people bringing the right behaviours, the right mindset, and not pulling the group down. So it's, that's been a real focus of me. And I think having that rugby environment with people in that mindset certainly helps feed me.
Happy days. Brilliant. We'll be wrapping up in the next couple of minutes, guys. So if anybody does have any comments or questions they would like to post to Gareth now before we go, please let them, please put them in the chat. There is one here from Howell. Lost my dad to acute myeloid leukemia, AML. Credit to you for speaking so open about your journey of living with leukemia. Can't be easy to speak so openly about your challenges. Respect.
Yeah, thank you. And again, I suppose, like I said, I count myself fortunate, really, with I think about what I can do. I think I hear about other people, I see other people, I know other people, and I see what they're restricted to do. So when I'm doing whatever I'm doing now, and even when I feel tired, I don't feel like doing something, I'm very mindful of what I can do. And I think one of the things I wanted to sort of say before I wrapped up really is something I think of a lot is sort of mindset of choosing your hurt. And essentially one sort of day I had this realization that when you feel sorry for yourself, when you're, and you can put this to any sort of scenario really, if you're just losing weight or you want to change your job or whatever it might be, but you're hurting, generally you're hurting, but going out and exercising, if that's what you need to do, or in my case, going out and exercising was the thing that benefited me, and anyone can relate to this and apply whatever they needed, whether it was going on a diet or whatever, but the both things hurt. There's no like sort of plastering or sugarcoat in this. There's no like one good thing and a negative thing. Both of them hurt. So which hurt are you going to choose? And I think that was the thing that sort of helped me in it. Right, well, I'm going to choose the hurt that's actually going to give me a long-term benefit rather than sticking with the hurt that I'm more comfortable with. Because I think that's sometimes where people get to when they're struggling with their own challenges mentally, is that they're in a comfort zone and it's a safe space. As much as they might not realize it, it's safer being in that sort of space where you can sort of deal with your own challenges and keep yourself there, because you don't necessarily want to step into unfamiliar territory.
Yeah, brilliant. What's your biggest? What's the future hold now for Gareth? Like, what's the treatment looking like now for you then, mate? And is it
I've got
regular
called
back
in
and forth the hospital now at the moment and regular checkups?
Yeah, as it stands, I have 3 monthly checkups. I've got one at the end of this month, so fingers crossed. All the signs are good. And what I focus more on now at the moment is, because that's as you can imagine, it's an emotional roller coaster. I go for a couple of months, and all of a sudden I build myself up for this phone call to see what's going to happen, and what the bloods will say. So I focus more on what the reds and white cells are doing now than the cancer cells, because ultimately, if I'm able to just keep functioning and living the way I live, all good. And if it's doing what it needs to be on the cancer, then it's a bonus. I think the medication, the treatment now, the doctors are obviously trying to balance things because they don't want to necessarily be too aggressive with it. If it meant that it actually took away the way I'm able to function at the moment, so trying to balance that. So yeah, treatment, Matt, can be ongoing. I read a story today, actually, someone who's got CML. They were diagnosed in spring 2024, and they're now undetectable, going into deep remission. So it could be any time. It could be 20 years. So I there's not a lot I can do about it. So again, I just focus on what I can control.
Great attitude, mate. You're so positive. A couple of people have said in here, and I'll bring the comments up now, but honestly, it's been great to get to know you over the last 2 or 3 years. You're such to have gone what you've gone through, mate, and to have such a positive outlook on life, like I said, is inspiring, mate. And honestly, proud to call you one of my friends, buddy.
Well, like I said, Beth, I gotta thank you, because as I said, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation now if we hadn't joined up with Spillers Be the Change program together. Because I said that was what got me on the horse and got me into that level of consistency that there's I said, really seeing exercise as something.
I had to bring this comment up from Shorty. Is it true that Angel is going to join Gareth on one of his weekly runs? If so, I'm in too. On a serious note, though,
I'm still trying to talk him into doing park run with me.
I have done a 5K, mind, and I'd never done one until until you started pushing me, mind, in fairness. So I have done it. I just need to get back doing it regular.
Yeah, I need to get him back out.
That's a dream, that is. I know I used to do the odd 3K here and there. I'd go out on my own. And when I can get my head in the game, I know I can do it. It's just getting back on the horse now, so to speak. But I can remember doing the first 5K with you, and I'd have to stop, wouldn't I? So many times.
Yeah.
And I think the next time we done it, then I kind of, you block M, or I think with me, because I'd never done it, it was always like I'd always focus, right, let's get to this point, let's get to that point, and if you can get that past that point without stopping, then great, just push yourself. And it is so rewarding to just
and even with the running, and it sounds stupid because of playing rugby at a decent level, but I had to teach myself how to run. And the running I'm doing is very much easy pace, low heart rate. And I think, I had to stop myself thinking every run I did was 100% balls out. And I think I've then got to enjoy endurance running because I can go further and slower, not putting that pressure on myself.
Yeah. Jeff Dela Cruz, he's our international viewer over in Ireland. Inspirational, mate, totally.
Thank you very much.
Suze says as well, thank you, Gareth, for sharing. Not sure what that one is. But like I said, Gareth, inspiring, but your story's incredible. I just wish you all the very best. You know where I am if I can ever help with anything. If we can promote whatever for you on the channel, we will.
My Just Giving page is scrolling across the bottom, I think. So people will be able to see more of the details of the events that I'm doing. As I said, it's the 7th of December. I'm doing a Milton Keynes half marathon. I'm going to start documenting stuff. So it'll be interesting if people think that this would be a worthwhile exercise. So if they want to drop into the comments or get in touch with you in the podcast after. But I'm thinking that, there's lots of influencers out there, and you see all these people who are in perfect shape and all the rest of it. But actually, would a normal guy going through challenges, sort of documenting what I'm doing to get myself in? And I think we could probably that would be useful. Then we could probably help you.
We could probably help you with that as well. But it's probably a conversation we can have again. Really.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
There's a question just before we wrap up, Ben. There's a question from Moses. Question for Gareth: what is more important, strength or tenacity? Well, I can't even say that. Tenacity and the willingness to try.
I think it comes back, like I said earlier, and good question, Moses. I think consistency beats intensity. So I think it's having that sort of willingness. I think you've got to have that sort of what I talk about this a lot, leaning into the hard thing. And generally speaking, if you're feeling a sense of resistance towards something, it's probably a really good sign that that's the thing that you should be tackling. And I think if you've got that strength to just tackle that thing and pull the plaster off, you will feel how enlightening it might be. And that might be having a difficult conversation with an employer. It might be going out and having a run. It might be dealing with something that you just really don't want to tackle in the house. But I think, when you know that hard thing is facing you, leaning into it, and having that strength to sort of just do it will open up so many things. And I think that's what I think is important anyway to me.
Brilliant. A comment from Reese says, discipline beats motivation for me.
Totally. Motivation runs out. And I think the way I see this, and I'm quite a visual learner, is that, there was an executive toy that you'd see on people's desks years ago, 4 balls hanging on a piece of string. Well, people wait for motivation to create momentum. If you visualize that executive toy, you actually have to pick one of the balls up to take. If you just have inertia and you just wait, nothing changes. So if you want to change, you've got to change. And I think, when that ball flicks, then you've got the momentum and you keep up. Motivation runs out. And I think if you can keep chipping away, like I said earlier, the plan A, B, and C for me means that I can still chip away, even if it's not the best. And you've heard me say this in a past laugh, but don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. And I think as long as I can keep chipping away, then I'm moving forward. And I don't allow myself now to worry on being perfect, because then I think you run the risk of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Awesome. But it's been great to have you on. Hopefully perhaps we can do this again now, closer to maybe one of the big events you're going to do, just to help promote it again. But honestly, mate, like I said, you're inspiring. Love to you and your family and that, and I'll catch up with you soon. But thanks for everybody who tuned in as well, and the questions and the comments. I'm sure Gareth appreciated that.
And if anyone wants to get, and I've recently signed up now on to Instagram as well. So running through leukemia is my tag on there. So again, I'm thinking about how I can document some of this and document some of the challenges a normal bloke with leukemia is facing while they're trying to prepare for some endurance events.
P.S. You are not normal, buddy.
I know that. Gareth will tell you that.
Good night, all.
Good night. So long.